Welcome everyone to the January meeting for the Essex County Field Naturalist Club. My name is Corey Reno. I'm the current club vice president. So thank you for joining us tonight on this live Zoom meeting. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest presenter, Kat Lucas. Kat is the Aquatics Links program assistant at the Toronto Zoo. She has a passion for conservation education and connecting others with the environment. She graduated from the University of Guelph with a Bachelor of Science, Zoology, and a Master of Environmental Science with a focus on aquatic toxicology and fish reproduction. So Kat's talk tonight will focus on some of the species at risk in our Great Lakes and our role as individuals to protect this sensitive and unique ecosystem. So throughout the presentation, Kat will talk more about opening up to some questions. And then at the end, we'll do another question session to wrap it up. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Kat. And Kat, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Corey. So yeah, I'm Kat and I work at the Toronto Zoo, and I've got a presentation tonight all about species at risk here in our Great Lakes. Thank you all for tuning in. I understand from others in my household there's a hockey game maybe tonight, so hopefully I can keep this just as interesting as that. So I'm going to start with some PowerPoint slides, but about halfway through we'll switch to some models. I know sometimes slides get a little dreary, and usually if we were doing this in person, I'd bring the models and you get to see them. So I'll get to show you some of those, and then we'll wrap things up with some more slides. If you've got questions, I'm happy if you put them in the chat bar as we go. And once we head over to the models, I'll have a chance to catch up on some questions then. And then of course at the end as well, like Corey said, we'll do mics off for now, but at the end, if there's questions or discussions that we want to talk about, you're welcome to unmute and we can have some time then to discuss anything that's on your mind. All right, so Corey did my introduction there. Just again, Bachelor of Science at University of Guelph, as well as a Master's of Environmental Science, where I did focus on aquatic toxicology. I was looking at how pharmaceuticals in our water are affecting fish reproduction. So specifically, I was looking at Tylenol. I'm sure many of us have taken Tylenol in our lives, and our body uses some of that, but we end up peeing some of that out too. And that can actually enter our natural bodies of water and possibly affect fish, though in my research, Tylenol wasn't a kind of drug that was doing anything to the fish, so it's okay to keep taking Tylenol. I have a few certificates in environmental conservation, as well as I'm working on a certificate of community development right now. Like many of us, I found myself with so much extra time on my hands this year, so I took some courses working towards that certificate. I've got some field certifications as well, so a good chunk of my job is doing outreach, but I do get to do some field work and get out into the wild every so often too. I'm bilingual, so I can do these presentations in French too, and we do offer free presentations to school groups. I know a lot of us are kind of in a different world right now, and many of our students that we know are learning from home. So if you know anyone who might be interested in booking presentations like this virtually, my email is there, and feel free to use that yourself or pass it on to any teachers or educators you might know. I do have a little personal connection to Essex County. Right after my master's, I did some research out on Lake Erie, and I was based out of Wheatley, Ontario, a small little town, and I was living in Kingsville, and it was just so great to get to know that area and really spend some time outside and see what kind of wildlife Essex County has in store. So hopefully today you'll learn a little bit more about the aquatic species that I know we're not always looking for. We're not always in the water. So we have some new things to hopefully take from this presentation today. But before I start, I would like to do a land acknowledgement and acknowledge the land that the Toronto Zoo sits on is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and many bands of Chippewa, including the Chippewa of Georgina Island. So our First Nations peoples were long the stewards and the caretakers of our land, And maybe today you'll learn something new and be inspired to continue to take care of the land and really respect all of the wildlife that we are so fortunate to have around us. Here we've got our map of the Great Lakes that stars you guys tonight in Essex County. I am based out of Toronto, so a little bit of a drive away. The Great Lake that is the closest to me would be Lake Ontario, but of course for most of you, it's likely Lake Erie. Some of you might be a little closer to Lake Huron though. Lake Erie, of course, is the smallest of our Great Lakes. Then we've got Lake Huron in the middle, which has the longest shoreline of any of the Great Lakes because of all of those islands, and in Georgian Bay there too. Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake that's located entirely in the United States of America, and it also has the highest human population around its coast. And then we've got Lake Superior up at the top, which is the largest of the Great Lakes, holding almost half of all of the water of the Great Lakes within Lake Superior. Of course, we know the bottom of the map is the United States and up top is Canada. So we do share the Great Lakes between the two countries, and it's important for all of us to do what we can to protect them. About 25% of Canadians get their drinking water out of the Great Lakes, so it's a pretty good reason to keep them safe for us. But about 3,500 species live around our Great Lakes as well. So we should be worrying about the health of the Great Lakes for all of these different living things too. And of course, we've got so many different kinds of habitats in the Great Lakes, which helps support so many different kinds of life. So on Lake Huron, as well as around Lake Ontario too, we have lots of nice sandy beaches. And these sandy beaches offer nice big open water, nice habitat for many different kinds of, oh, sorry.
Invite. What means invite?
Oh. To offer habitat to many different kinds of species who like that big open water. We also have lots of different rivers that connect larger bodies of water as well as different lakes and ponds that we might have.
Oh,
And,
perhaps
let's see. I can just mute. No problem there. But our rivers, that's where the water is sometimes moving a little bit faster, and there's different kinds of animals and living things that prefer that faster moving water compared to our wetlands, right? Water is almost not moving at all. And there's many different living things that prefer water that's more stagnant and more still, and that is better for their life cycle.
You're muted.
We also see these rocky areas up near Tobermory on Lake Huron, where the water there's lots of caves and spaces for these different animals to hide, and that really is helpful for them. And we've got all of these different kinds of living things here. Like I said, 3,500 different species here in our Great Lakes.
Alt and A
all of these different ones here. And so we've got insects, we've got many insects that actually start their life in water, things like mosquitoes and dragonflies, where as eggs, as larvae, they spend their first chunk of their life in water. And as adults, they start to grow their wings and fly out. Of course, we've got many different kinds of fishes here in our Great Lakes, as well as crayfishes, which are like mini lobsters, reptiles like our turtles, lots of plants, lots of different kinds of fungi. We've got mussels here in our Great Lakes, which sometimes aren't that exciting to look at. They look a lot like a rock, and unfortunately, we don't spend too much time thinking about them, but they are really helpful for our ecosystems because they are filter feeders and they are able to clean the water for us. And hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about mussels today, and you'll grow some new appreciation for them and maybe start looking for them the next time you're out in nature. We've also got mammals like our beavers, birds, amphibians like our frogs and toads. So many different kinds of life right here around our Great Lakes. And I assume many of you, while you've been out on nature walks, have seen many of these different kinds of animals. In the Great Lakes, we've got over 150 different kinds of fish, everything from small minnows like our red-side dace up to the Great Lakes' largest freshwater fish, which is the lake sturgeon. And those can grow to be about 2 meters long. So these days when we're trying to stay safe, it's a good idea to picture a lake sturgeon between you and somebody you might not know and keep us all nice and healthy. But of these 150 fish, about 20% of them are listed as at risk or endangered. So that's a good chunk of these fish here that are losing their habitat. Their habitat is of a lesser quality. They're just not finding good space to live anymore. And that's a real problem for many of these fish. And we really need to figure out what we can do to better help the different wildlife that we have around us. We've also got about 40 different kinds of freshwater mussels here in our Great Lakes. And Ontario is actually Canada's freshwater mussel hotspot because we have so many species here. Of the about 50 kinds of mussels in Canada, 40 of them are found right here. So we are so fortunate to have these many different kinds of mussels. And like I said earlier, they do this ecosystem service. They're able to clean the water for us. They like to eat things like algae and bacteria like E. coli, which of course are things we don't want in our water to drink or even to swim in. So they are really helpful for our ecosystems. However, 65% of them are listed as at risk or endangered. So that's a good chunk of these freshwater mussels, which we don't know much about, really. We don't think about them very much. They're not that exciting, charismatic megafauna that we like to see out there, but they are there and they do need our help. So we'll learn a little bit more about these freshwater mussels today, especially a kind that you do have right in Essex County. But now let's get to know some of these animals and living things that we have near within the Great Lakes, especially within Essex County. So this here is a lake sturgeon, and as I said earlier, they are the largest freshwater fish that we find here in our Great Lakes. It's kind of got a bit of a rivalry with the white sturgeon that you find in British Columbia, which is also a freshwater fish. And you go back and forth, and some people from Ontario will say the lake sturgeon is the largest, but if you're in British Columbia, you'll say the white sturgeon is the largest. So a little bit of friendly rivalry there. And these lake sturgeon are prehistoric fish, which means they lived at, the family of sturgeon existed before and at the same time as dinosaurs. And we know this based on what their skeleton is made of. And maybe you've got an idea of what their skeleton might be made of if it's not bone. It's the same thing that's in our ears as well as our nose. And if you've got an idea, it's cartilage, and that is that softer material that's not quite bone, and that's what makes up the majority of their skeleton. And we know that cartilage came before bone in terms of evolution, so that's how we know how old these lake sturgeon are. You might know of another fish that is also made of cartilage, and that would be the shark. But of course, we do not have sharks here in our Great Lakes. Not something to worry about, especially with that mouthful of those sharp teeth. And you might be worried now that this lake sturgeon has a mouthful of really sharp teeth. But luckily, lake sturgeon actually don't have teeth. So you can see on its chin, it has these barbels, these whiskers, and those are covered in taste buds like our tongue. And they will use those barbels to sift through the gravel and the sand at the bottom of the lake. And when they taste some bugs that they want to eat, they will just slurp them up whole. So they are not something we need to worry about nibbling on our toes out in the Great Lakes. And the lake sturgeon are found in Essex County. They can be found along the west coast of Lake Erie, as well as historically on the west coast of Lake Erie, as well as on the south end of Lake Huron. And they are endangered. They only recently moved from threatened, which is a more okay listing, up to endangered. So their populations are still struggling, and they're still facing quite a few varieties of threats out in our Great Lakes. The two main reasons, though, that they are listed as endangered, one has to do with how long they live. A lake sturgeon can live over 100 years, and that is a really long time for a fish. And because they live so long, everything in their life happens a little bit slower. It takes about 30 to 35 years for them to reach sexual maturity. So 30 to 35 years to stay alive, avoid being eaten, avoid being impacted by humans, all these different threats out there before they can even have their first round of eggs. And that's a long time to stay alive for a fish. Whereas if we put it into perspective, humans reach sexual maturity around 15 years old, and we do live for the most part to around 100 years old. So it does take about twice as long for these lake sturgeon to be ready to start their families compared to humans. Another reason that lake sturgeon are endangered is because of something that some fancy people like to eat. And you might know what that is, and it's caviar. And caviar is just the fancy word for fish eggs. And back in the day, this used to be a very highly prized food, getting that lake sturgeon caviar. However, luckily over the past 50 or so years, it's been illegal to harvest or collect any lake sturgeon caviar here in our Great Lakes, which has definitely helped the lake sturgeon these days. But again, it's still not enough because we're still seeing them move their way up our at-risk levels here. And the next step past endangered is going to be extinct, unfortunately. So we really need to think about how we can help these really huge fish that really need our help. Right now, I am going to switch from the slides to some models, and we'll look at some of these fun models, and then we'll head back to the slides after so that we can catch up on some of these pictures. Are there any questions just yet about anything I've talked about so far? I don't see anything in the chat. Jean, I see a hand up. Oh, there we go.
Okay, I'll talk faster than I type. So I'm just curious, it's illegal to collect the fish eggs from the sturgeon, but is it, with them being endangered, is it still legal to fish for sturgeon?
So they are protected for fishing as well. So if you can catch and release, but you can't catch and keep, though there are exceptions made for First Nations peoples. And Heather, did I see, or Helene? Did I see another hand? All right, so the next fish I'm going to talk about is the red-side dace, and this is it right here. This is a full-size model, just about the same size as my finger. You can see it has red on its side, and dace just means a small fish since it's a type of minnow. They are a kind of fish that you would find in Erie County as well, however, or Essex County. However, about 80% of them live within the Greater Toronto Area. And then the other 20% is split between Essex County down around Lake Erie, as well as up near Sault Ste. Marie on Lake Huron. So there aren't that many left. They are another endangered fish that we have here in our Great Lakes. And a lot of the threats that they are facing are due to human activity. So if you can imagine, with most of their populations right here in the Greater Toronto Area, they are experiencing a lot of human activity, whether it's human development, pollution, littering. All of this contributes to a lower water quality, and they are very susceptible to pollution. So they can't handle any poor water quality. They can't, oh, thank you for the spotlight. I should have mentioned that so you can see if I haven't popped up big on your screen. But they are, they're having some really hard times finding good quality habitat because of all of this human activity. They are a fish that we want to keep around too. Obviously, one really cool thing that they do is they are very good at controlling mosquito populations. They are a big fan of eating mosquitoes and flies, and what they will do is they can actually jump up out of the water about 10 centimeters or so and pull mosquitoes right out of the air. So we do want to keep that water clean and clear and cool as well for these red-side dace so that they can continue to eat those mosquitoes for us. There's also a local connection to conservation right in Essex County. University of Windsor is doing quite a lot of work trying to bring the red-side dace back, and they have recently been working on learning how to breed the red-side dace in the lab to later release them out into the wild. And that's actually how we got this 3D printed model. Windsor was getting them made because the red-side dace will only nest in the, will only lay eggs in the nest of another kind of fish, which is the creek chub. And when they were trying to breed them in the lab, they were finding that the red-side dace weren't breeding. They couldn't figure out why. And then they learned about the creek chub. So they actually had these 3D printed models of creek chub used to trick the live, real red-side dace to lay their eggs in the fake creek chub's nest. So a very, very interesting work coming out of the University of Windsor. And hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll really figure things out and start being able to release them into the wild again. Another fish that we have here in our Great Lakes is the American eel. And this, again, is a full-size model, about 1 meter long. And one really cool thing about American eels is that they will only lay their eggs and breed and spawn in one place in the whole world. And that is just off the coast of Florida, which is called the Sargasso Sea, which is just an area within the Atlantic Ocean. So all the American eels will gather down there. They will spawn and then they will die because the migration is just so long and so hard that the rest of their energy is just used to spawn, and that completes their life cycle. But these tiny little, the baby eels, once they hatch, they are entirely see-through, and they are called glass eels. And at this point, they start their migration from the coast of Florida up the coast of North America in the Atlantic Ocean, and they will start turning into our freshwater rivers. These guys here likely wouldn't have been all the way in Lake Erie historically. They basically got to the east coast of Lake Ontario, and that's kind of what they called home. And there was a very large population in Ottawa River. However, some of the threats they started to face were barriers to their migration. Their round trip migration is about 5,000 kilometers, and that's about the same as driving from probably over in Erie, Essex County, all the way up to the Yukon and back. That's about 500 hours in a car. So you can just imagine how much of a journey that is for these fish. And they will spend a good chunk of their life in these freshwater rivers. And once they grow to full size, usually maybe about 5 years old, that's when they turn around and start swimming all the way back to Florida. However, they're now encountering many barriers. And originally it would have been things like pulp mills and lumber mills, but these days more often it is hydroelectric dams, which are now blocking this migration. However, some pretty exciting facts about the American eel is that they can breathe in water like a fish. We know they've got gills, but they are also able to breathe on land, and we know most fish can't. And when they come up onto land, they can kind of move like a snake, and then they will produce a lot of mucus on their skin. And once they are nice and moist and damp, they can actually breathe through their skin. So this is a really helpful adaptation to navigate around these dams and these barriers. But of course, some of these barriers are very large, and the eels can't get around all of them. So we have seen the numbers drop significantly, and it is now illegal to fish for eels, or at least catch and release only. Any questions about the eel or the red-side dace? I didn't stop for questions there. All right, so next up, we have the Atlantic salmon. So it's again another full-sized model, just under 1 meter long. And the Atlantic salmon are generally a top predator in their food webs. So they have lots of different fish that they will eat, basically anything smaller than them. However, in the wild, there aren't too many things that will eat them other than us humans. Historically, we had many Atlantic salmon in Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes. However, back about 200 years ago, when our first settlers came over from Europe, they saw all of these wonderful Atlantic salmon and fished them down to basically nothing. So right now, we say that they are locally extinct. There's no self-sustaining adult population here in our Great Lakes of Atlantic salmon. However, I'm sure many of us have eaten Atlantic salmon at some point in our life, so we know they are not gone forever within the entire world. But there's lots of Atlantic salmon still in the Atlantic Ocean. Anywhere from like Newfoundland to Norway, we've got Atlantic salmon. However, the the landlocked population that we used to have here in Lake Ontario doesn't exist really anymore. Atlantic salmon have an interesting life cycle. They will start their life as an egg. So you can see these are some fake salmon eggs, usually used for bait. And they're about the size of a green pea, usually bright orange or bright red. And when we get back to the slides, I'll show you some photos of the salmon eggs. From here, they hatch into what we call an alvin, and an alvin is about 1 centimeter long, basically the size of your thumbnail. And when they hatch, they come out with this big orange blob on their body, and this is called a yolk sac. And it's similar to the yellow part of a chicken egg, the yellow yolk there. And it's basically filled with all of this nutrients. They are so vulnerable at this stage, in the like 0 to 6 months old. And in the fish world, the parents don't take care of the babies. So they need to be ready to go live their own life and have a really good chance of surviving. So they come ready with this built-in fridge, so they can hide in the gravel, absorb all the nutrients in the yolk sac until they get a little bit bigger, a little faster, a little more ready for the world. And at that point, after 6 months, when that yolk sac is fully absorbed, we call them a fry, and about the same size as a French fry, about 1 inch long or so. And at this point, they're off catching their own food. They'll start with small things, but they'll keep growing and growing in these freshwater rivers. Once they're about 2 to 3 years old, we call them a smolt, and this is about 6 to 8 inches long. And the smolt is kind of like the teenager of the salmon. And this is when they say, I'm done living at home, I'm off to see the world. There's more out there for me. And this is when they start their migration. So the landlocked populations that we would have seen here in the Great Lakes would just swim down to Lake Ontario. That would be their nice big body of water. However, the Atlantic salmon that do live closer to the ocean would swim all the way out to the ocean. In the ocean, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So they go from this smolt size to full size in about 3 to 5 years. And then once they're full size, they do their return migration to those freshwater rivers where they started their life. And that's where they will spawn and start their family. The salmon that live in Lake Ontario, their migrations were never as long as those who would have been going to the ocean. So they could actually save more energy and spawn for multiple years and keep returning to those same spawning grounds year after year, which is really great for their population to grow and continue to be stable. Some good news, though, is that the Toronto Zoo does work with the Ontario Government Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. And we work with students in classrooms, and we actually bring Atlantic salmon eggs into the classroom hatchery, which is just an aquarium. And the students will raise the Atlantic salmon until they are about 6 months old. And then we go and release them out into local waterways. We usually, in a good year, are releasing about 3,000 Atlantic salmon. Of course, this year we are not able to run the full program, but we are still going to find ways to bring the salmon to the zoo and raise them there, as well as hopefully do some virtual programming around the Atlantic salmon. So the goal is by 2025 to have a self-sustaining population of the Atlantic salmon in the Great Lakes. And this is year 12 of the program. And the good news is we are starting to see returning adults who are coming back to those rivers where we release them. And we are now seeing them start to spawn themselves. And hopefully that means in the next couple of years, maybe humans can intervene a little less and we'll let nature run its course there. Salmon in Cobourg, they were living in Lake Ontario. Would those be the fish we released? So we release mainly in 2 spots, that the Toronto Zoo does at least, in Duffins Creek, which is in Ajax, and then Bell Fountain Conservation Area on the Credit River in Mississauga. So those are our 2 main spots. However, the government definitely has permits and definitely does a lot more of the releasing, and likely those could be some of them that they would have released out in Cobourg. As well as other kinds of salmon and trout that they stock as well. Any other questions? I will head back to the slides now. So again, I won't be able to see that chat box, but if you've got question, just put it in there and we'll come back to it again at the end. So again, that's our red side dace. Does live right down in Essex County, and some really great work being done at the University of Windsor to try and bring them back and restabilize those populations. There's that American eel. We can see right in the middle, that glass eel, the little baby that's almost totally see-through. That's such great camouflage for, again, such a vulnerable fish during a time when it can't really defend itself. And then we've got the Atlantic salmon. We see those photos along the right with those eggs. Those little black dots are actually their eyes. So even at this point in their development, they've already developed their eyes. And then below that, we have the alvin with that bright orange yolk sac that they use with all of that nutrients to help them get through that first 6 months. And then below that, that's the fry. And we can already see it started to pick up some of the patterning of the salmon. Next up, we've got a spotted gar. And again, these are a kind of fish that we would historically find right here in Essex County. And they are a really cool looking fish, in my opinion. They've got a really nice long beak-like nose with lots of sharp teeth in there. They are an ambush predator, which means they sit and they wait. And when they find the prey of choice, they will jump out and snatch it up, as we can see on that picture on the left. They're also nocturnal, which we know means they're awake at night, and they're most active at night, which again helps with this ambush predator. They can use the shadows and the darkness to really hide and grab that fish when it's not paying attention. They are endangered, and that is mostly due to habitat destruction. So we're seeing less and less vegetation for them to hide behind. We're also seeing less clear water, whether it's with sediments like the sand and the gravel at the bottom of these lakes and rivers is being stirred up, and they rely so heavily on their sight to catch their prey. And unfortunately, the water is becoming too murky for them to see through it. And that's causing them to go hungry. And of course, that's never a good thing. So we are working to bring up these habitats, of course, to try and do what we can to help with these all of these different fish that we've seen tonight. And then lastly, we've got the northern riffle shell, just to switch things up. And they are a kind of freshwater mussel. And of course, they are native to Canada, but you may have also heard of zebra mussels, which are an invasive species. And the zebra mussels would be the main threat to our northern riffle shell, as well as our other freshwater mussels. And we will talk a little bit more about them in a minute. But like I said earlier, these are filter feeders. So they kind of open their shell, they take in that water, they will pull things out like algae and bacteria like E. coli. They will eat those things and basically spit the water out even cleaner than it was to start. And of course, that is so helpful for us humans who are drinking or swimming in this water, as well as it's helpful for many other species out there too. They are also in the same family as a snail, so they've got that hard outside, squishy living thing on the inside, and maybe we've learned some more things about them today and can start to appreciate those freshwater mussels, and maybe next time we're out in nature, we'll start looking for them and really appreciate how much they do for us. But here in our Great Lakes, I know I've talked about some really wonderful animals and living things that we've got here, but unfortunately, they're also facing a lot of threats, which I've touched a little bit on, but we'll do a quick review. Of course, us humans are really the main threat here and all of the different activities that we do. We've got agriculture, of course, and we have more and more humans, and we need to feed more and more humans, so our farms keep growing, whether it's plant agriculture or animal agriculture, and they're growing into our green spaces and closer to our bodies of water. And often farms use pesticides or fertilizers, which can impact our natural bodies of water. We are also seeing our cities grow and grow in that urbanization and urban sprawl. And more than ever, we're finding that humans would rather live in the city than the country. And that's having some big impacts on those species that already lived in these areas of these cities long before we were here. Especially like that red-side dace, and we're just finding less habitat for them in where they used to live. Overfishing used to be a bigger problem in the Great Lakes, but luckily there's many regulations that are able to keep it in check these days. We've also got those hydroelectric dams that are those huge barriers to our species that migrate. But again, humans have noted some of our mistakes here, and we've built some infrastructure to help these fish now get through. So sometimes we'll see things like a fishway, which is like a water slide that will run beside the dam. Sometimes we see things called a fish ladder, and the fish can kind of jump up those steps and go over the dam. And sometimes we even see something called a salmon cannon, which is basically like a big tube, and the salmon go in there and get shot up and over the dam. So we are learning, and we're figuring things out and helping these animals. We've also got litter in our Great Lakes with lots of single-use plastics that are just not getting where they need to go and unfortunately entering our environment. And we also see things like runoff after a rain or a snow event. We see the different sorts of chemicals and contaminants being picked up by this water and going into our Great Lakes. Whether it's urban runoff, and it might have things like gasoline, or especially at this time of year, we see lots of road salts, and that is of course not helpful for our freshwater systems. But we also see agricultural runoff, which could have, again, those pesticides and fertilizers in there, which can contribute to algal blooms and other not so great things in our Great Lakes. But in addition to all of that, we also have invasive species to worry about, and they are living things that have come from somewhere else, and they're causing problems with our native species that have always been here. So we'll get to do a little meet and greet here and get to know some of these different species. To start, we'll look at this sea lamprey, and those are those two black snake-like things hanging onto our trout there. And they are hanging on using this mouth that's full of really sharp teeth. It's about the size of a toonie or so. And they will latch onto the fish and suck the fish's blood until the fish either dies, or it might fall off a little early, but the fish can be left with a big open wound, which can get infected. And that's no fun for the fish either. From its name, we can see that they are a saltwater critter. However, they've made their way into the Great Lakes with the help of our canal systems, and they are here now. They said, it's not my favorite, it's not as salty as I would like, but look at all this food. I'm happy to hang out for a bit. The good news is, though, that the sea lamprey are more or less totally under control in our Great Lakes. Our federal government has done some really great work managing these, controlling them, getting them out of the water. And basically what they do is they will go to where the sea lamprey want to breed. Once they're all ready to spawn, they scoop them all up and they don't put them back. And of course, when we get those adults out of the water, it's so much easier to control that population before they start breeding and having those babies, and that's more of them to worry about. So it's great that we're grabbing them before they get that chance. Usually the number one question I get is, will this get me? And the simple answer is no. They prefer cold-blooded animals like fish, right? Humans, we are warm-blooded. When it's hot, we sweat. When we're cold, we shiver. Our body can sort of maintain our temperature for us. However, that's the opposite of cold-blooded animals. They are whatever temperature that is in their surroundings. However, I don't know, maybe you're feeling like extra strong and adventurous these days and you need to get out of the house. Maybe you're thinking about swimming across Lake Ontario one of these days, and that's about a 40-hour swim. So you'll be in the water for a really long time, and likely long enough to drop your blood temperature enough to trick these sea lampreys. And there are stories of these long distance swimmers who do have to stop, yank off the sea lampreys, but of course we're wearing wetsuits. We're not out there without a wetsuit on, and we have hands, which unfortunately is another thing fish don't have. I also had the opportunity back last February to have a sea lamprey suck on my hand. And in my line of work, you have to say yes to this kind of opportunity. So the sea lamprey latched onto my hand, hung in there for like 10 seconds, and then it said yuck, and I said yuck, and it fell off. So I've lived to tell the tale, and I'm not scared of swimming in the Great Lakes, or at least not scared of these guys being out there trying to get me, that's for sure. Next up, we have zebra mussels, which you might be familiar with. They are those smaller mussels that are on top of the bigger one on the picture on the left. You can see some of them do have that characteristic stripe on them, which is how they got their name, those zebras. And they came here in the 1960s and 70s, and they came over on cargo ships from Russia. When you move cargo, generally you load the cargo onto the boat, and then you fill what's called a ballast tank, which is inside the boat with water to help create some balance so the boat isn't too top heavy. And the boat came over, offloaded that cargo, and then also dumped the ballast tank. So that way the boat is lighter and can have a faster trip back home. However, little did we know that those zebra mussels were hitchhiking and got a free cruise and ended up here in our Great Lakes. Since then, they have spread all over the Great Lakes, and unfortunately, we do not know how to best manage them just yet. So there's still lots more research to come and to figure out how we are going to make sure that we can get them under control because they are causing problems. Firstly, to us humans, they are really sharp, and if you step on them, they can easily cut your foot open, and that's not fun for us. However, they are also causing problems to our native freshwater mussels, which I mentioned earlier. These guys are so quick to cover whatever they want to cover. So they're taking out that habitat space, and there's not much habitat space left for our native freshwater mussels. You can see even on that picture, that poor mussel probably can't even open up and eat anyway. So it's causing lots of problems for that mussel. But they're also eating so much food that's out there, all that algae and bacteria, that there's nothing left for our freshwater mussels to eat anyways. So definitely not a good thing to be having here in our Great Lakes, but they're still hopeful that we'll see some more research and figure out some ways to get them under control. A few weeks ago, I was reading an article about how they were introducing copper in some study sites on Lake Michigan, and the copper was enough to decrease these populations by like 90 to 95%. So there is some good news. It's not something that's, I guess it does need a little bit more work and more understanding with this research, but there's definitely hope. And I think hopefully in the next decade or so, we might be able to hear some good news out of these zebra mussels as well. Then next up, we have Asian carp, and there are 4 different kinds of carps that fit into this category. That would be the black carp, the silver carp, the grass carp, and the big-headed carp. And so those 4 were all brought here intentionally. Many of them were used in ornamental or decorative ponds in substitution for koi or goldfish, just something different. However, after some very large storm events, many of these so-called isolated carp were actually able to escape during a flood and entered our natural bodies of water. They are a problem because they can be very disruptive in these ecosystems. So something like a black carp, they like to eat the insects that live in the roots of the water plants. So they'll go digging into these roots to look for these insects, and they'll end up bringing up the plants, which are there to help keep the water clear. And again, like I said, with those fish like our spotted gar and our red-side dace, they need to be able to see through the water to catch their prey. However, now that the carp have stirred everything up, taken away these plants, which help bring down a lot of the sediments and hold them down, the water is so murky that it's really causing some hardships to our native species. If you're looking for a pick-me-up, you can go check out some fun videos on YouTube. Carp, when they are scared, if a boat goes by, they like to jump up out of the water. So if you're ever looking for a smile, there's some videos out there you can check out. But we're also smiling because the Asian carp here are under control in the Great Lakes as well. There's no self-sustaining adult population in our Great Lakes, so we do not need to worry about them breeding and introducing more into our Great Lakes. And again, many groups, whether it's the government or other conservation groups, are out there scooping out the adults when they can, stopping them from breeding, and it's another good news story that we have here in our Great Lakes. So now that we know about some of these really wonderful species and maybe some of these not so great things that are going on, what can we do? One pretty easy thing we should all be able to do is conserve water and just use less water. These days we're washing our hands more than ever, and of course we want to stay safe, stay healthy, but one thing we can do is when we're lathering and getting all that soap, we can just turn off the tap and leave that 30 seconds or so, turn that tap off, and then turn it on when we're ready to rinse. Same with when we're brushing our teeth, right? We're going to stand there for like 2 minutes or so. We can keep that tap off and just turn it on again when we're ready to rinse. Maybe it's a new year and you want to set some New Year's resolutions. One thing you can keep in mind is possibly taking a shorter shower. A good shower length is maybe about 7 minutes. So you can think about how long your own shower is and then maybe make some goals and some resolutions to bringing that down too and saving that water because maintaining the water availability that we have is so important because we don't want to take more than we need. And especially if our cities and towns keep growing, we will keep taking more water and possibly taking more than we need away from our ecosystems that are out there. So just something easy we can all do is just think a little bit more about our water usage. We also don't want to litter. We don't want to be a litter bug. We don't want to be the kind of person who just throws garbage anywhere, right? That's not a very nice kind of person. And I'm sure many of you have been out in nature and seen, you know, just how some people can just not be that respectful. And I'm sure likely as a group, you've run some cleanups as well and trying to keep Essex in a nice, healthy state in a nice ecosystem. But we really want to be careful, you know, if we see garbage and it's safe to pick up, then it's always a great idea to pick it up and get it out of the environment. We also want to be careful about what goes down our drain. So we talked a little bit about road salts these days, right? If we're out putting salt on our sidewalks or our driveways, we can take a minute and think about just how much we need and whether we can use a little bit less or use some alternatives like sand and maybe even do half and half and just try to cut down on that salt that way. And we want to be careful about what we put down the drain. So things like expired medicine shouldn't go down the drain. You can take that back to your local pharmacy and they will be happy to dispose of that for you. Of course, we know our 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but we've got 2 new layers to add on top now. We've got rethink, which is about reflecting on the different activities we do, the different products we use every day, and really think about whether those things are good for the environment. And if they're not, maybe we can think of some ways to incorporate different activities or different products that would be better for the environment. We also want to refuse those things that are not good for the environment and just say no to those things that are not any good. So maybe next time you're out getting fast food and they offer you a plastic straw, you just say no, thank you, right? And that's one less straw that we're putting into the world and one less straw that might end up sneaking away from landfill and getting into our Great Lakes. Reduce, reuse are the same, still pretty important, but at the bottom now we have recycle. And that is unfortunate because we are now learning that probably only about 9% of everything that we put in our blue bin is being recycled. So that's about 90% of those things we are wishfully recycling, throwing in our blue bin are actually going to landfill and not being recycled at all. And that is not a blue bin program that's working for us, that's for sure. However, the good news is that our provincial government will be introducing a brand new blue bin program in 2022. So in the next year or so, we should be hearing some more details about a blue bin program that will hopefully be working again for us and get us all back on the same page and understanding more about recycling. Right now, with that 90% that's ending up in landfill, a lot of that has to do with contamination. So something that I don't think has ever been that clear or communicated that well is that all things that you put in the blue bin should be clean. So things like peanut butter containers or yogurt containers, they do need to be empty and clean before you put them in the blue bin. Otherwise, they could contaminate other plastics and even the paper in there as well, forcing things to go to landfill instead. So hopefully with our new blue bin program comes a little bit more education too, so that we can all learn more and be better at recycling to get us all working towards a program that's better for the environment. And we can also be informed consumers. I assume most of us on the call tonight are of age to vote, so we can vote and support politics that are in our values. However, we can also vote with our dollar too. So that means just knowing about the different sorts of products and services we'd like, and make sure we're making good choices. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a seafood watch guide, and the Vancouver Aquarium has a similar program called Ocean Wise. And both of these are really great resources to help you make better decisions when you're buying seafood at the grocery store. So it shows you which ones may be more sustainable options. The Seafood Watch Guide does have an app, and Ocean Wise has an online platform instead. But again, both of those are pretty easy to access. Next time you're at the grocery store looking at seafood, you're able to get some more information and try and make some better choices too if they're available to you. There's also some very new research that is showing that every time we wash our clothes, little pieces of threads are falling off, going down our drains, bypassing our treatments, and going right into our Great Lakes. And this is a problem these days because so much of our clothing is made of plastic. So if you check your labels and you see something like acrylic or polyester on your sweater or other clothes, that is code for plastic. And of course, that plastic in our natural environments is not great because they are also now finding that fish and birds are now eating these little threads that they think are other things, maybe worms, but they are now accidentally eating this plastic. Some things that we can do though, because of course there's always hope. One thing we can do is upgrade our washing machine, which is generally not quite affordable. You can purchase some filter systems that are basically the same price as another washing machine, which is not really a helpful solution. However, there's other things called guppy bags, Guppy bags, and it's kind of like a delicates bag or a garment bag, and you would put your clothing made with synthetic fibers into the bag before you wash, zip it up, and it's very fine mesh. It lets the water through so your clothes get clean. However, it's fine enough mesh that it traps any of these threads. So that's another more affordable alternative than upgrading your whole washing machine setup. Other things we can do too are next time we're buying clothes, we check those labels on the new clothes and say, can I make a better choice? Can I find something with those natural fibers like cotton or linen? We can also buy secondhand and extend the life of products that already exist. And by doing that, we're putting a little less pressure on the fashion industry to keep pumping out new clothes, especially very cheap clothes made with cheap plastic, because plastic these days is a much cheaper alternative to cotton. And lastly, again, maybe this is a New Year's resolution to think about, is whether you can try to buy less clothes in general. I know my closet's nice and full. I can take a break, maybe the whole year, maybe not buy any new clothes is a big idea that I have, but I'm not going to be too hard on myself. But just something to think about it and making those changes in your life that would help the environment, especially close to home right here in our Great Lakes. Maybe today I've piqued your interest a little bit about some freshwater mussels and you're interested in learning more. Well, the Toronto Zoo has an app on for your smartphone, whether it's Google or Apple phone. And we have this app that we've partnered with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the federal government, to help people when they're out and about and they find a mussel and they want to identify it because most people, like I said, they're not taking too much time thinking about mussels, but this app will help you identify what you've got in front of you. And if you choose to submit your finding, it can be verified from a scientist at the zoo or the government. And we take this information and we use it to try and find ways to better protect these freshwater mussels and better understand where they live and what their habitat is, to offer more protections for the habitat as well. So there's not too much research out there for these freshwater mussels. So we're looking for as much help as we can to get this data and really help protect these freshwater mussels. 65% of them are endangered and need our help. So the more information we can get, the better. And of course, none of this would be possible without our wonderful partners. So we are so fortunate to work with many different conservation authorities, other conservation groups, academic institutions like the University of Windsor, as well as our different school boards and government groups as well. So lots of great work being done all across Ontario to help protect these Great Lakes. And that is everything I've got for you tonight. We do have some social media pages. So if you're ever looking for some more info about the Great Lakes presented in a fun and engaging way, you're welcome to give us a follow on any of these. And again, I left my email there at the beginning. If you've got any more questions or want to chat about anything I've talked about tonight, you're welcome to send me an email. But right now I'm happy to take some questions as well. John is asking, where can I buy these guppy bags? So that's Guppy. I'll put that in the chat. And I believe that Mountain Equipment Co-op used to sell them, but I've checked recently and it doesn't look like they sell them anymore. But in Essex County, if you have a small business who's like eco-friendly minded, you might be able to order them through a local business, or the Guppy Bag. They do have a website where you can order online. I believe they ship out of the United States, so it might cost a little bit more, but definitely a good investment. I have one, and for sure with my workout clothes, which these days most of our workout clothes are made from polyester. It's quick dry, doesn't smell too bad. So of course, those are the things we're looking for in our workout clothes, but it's nice and easy to throw them into the Guppy Bag, do the wash, and make sure that that's one less thing that might be entering our Great Lakes. If we've got other questions, you can post them in the chat or just unmute yourself at this point.
Okay, well, I think it was very informative, so maybe that's why everybody got their answers right
Some time to absorb it
from
all.
the presentation.
There's
Well,
another question over there, though. Someone asked a question in the chat.
yeah, I think
I got the one about the salmon in Coburg earlier, and then yes, the Guppy Bags. You can purchase them online.
Could I add something about that? Do you think it's a good idea to get that laundry detergent called True Earth? That means you don't have to use a plastic, container and throw out that plastic container, especially if 90% goes to landfill. Now I'm thinking that container isn't getting recycled. So True Earth is just those. Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, so I think I've seen advertisements for them. I think are they the paper ones? They look like a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah, it's just plastic free, no packaging at all. I think it's all paper, even the packaging. And so that can be recycled easily as paper, but the actual sheets, I guess it's kind of almost like a dryer sheet in the same sense, where it's just a little, I think about the same size as a credit card. You throw it in with your washing, instead of pouring liquid detergent or even powder detergent, you would just use this instead and throw it in. And it's definitely a great alternative if you're looking to reduce your plastic, because we're finding that recycling isn't necessarily the great thing that we hope it is. And the thing is, the future hopefully holds some good news as well with this new program.
any other questions? Okay, well, on behalf of the club, I'd like to thank Kat for this fantastic presentation. I know you sparked something in me about the mussels, so I'm sure, and everything else as well in the presentation. It was very informative. Thank you very much. Like I said, we'll be putting this up on YouTube. So if there's any other questions later, we'll try and answer those through YouTube or our social media channels as well and get them back to Kat. But again, thank you very much for taking your time tonight. It was a great presentation.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Take care.